This may be the most important and far-reaching paper that this researcher has ever written. The knowledge and utilization of gravitobiology will profoundly alter the entire future of mankind. The paper has been very difficult to write. It advances what to the West is an astounding breakthrough in understanding the mechanisms for the direct biological effects of Maxwellian electromagnetics. However, one is given great pause at the sobering implications for both good and evil. Although secretly well known and highly developed in the Soviet Union for decades, this new technology ushers in a completely new area to the West, electrogravitobiology, or shortened, gravitobiology, which enfolds and drastically extends present photobiology. Gravitobiology is the application of a unified field theory conception of electromagnetics, M, and gravitation, G, to the total energetics exchanges, 1, between a living organism and its external environment, interexchanges, and 2, inside the living organism and between, within, and among its parts and its whole, intra-exchanges. Gravitobiology drastically changes the present reductionist view of photobiology, where the whole is simply the sum of its parts, and the superposition principle rigorously holds. In photobiology, and, in general, in ordinary physics, one specifies the externalized field-matter exchange on, between, and amongst the parts. Then it is assumed that one has specified the total action of the whole. On the other hand, in gravitobiology, reductionism and superposition are only pale shadows of the total biological truth. Now one approaches a completely holographic situation: the part exchanges with and conditions the whole, and the whole exchanges with and conditions the part. In gravitobiology, fundamental changes are made to two untouchable primary sciences, general relativity and quantum mechanics. In so doing, one unites and extends both of them into a common unified approach, and drastically enriches the present conception of the physical exchanges in, of, between, among, and within physical systems. The foundation's changes to general relativity allow the incorporation of a hidden variable theory, the Whittaker internalized electromagnetic energy structure of the potential, without violation of Bell's theorem. So first one must change general relativity. One must unite electromagnetics and gravity on the most fundamental level possible, that of the quantum particles of the fields. The clue to the procedure is the fact that, in quantum field theory, the graviton has spin, 2, and the photon has spin, 1. This strongly suggests that two photons ought to couple together to produce a graviton, if the resultants of the E and B fields of the coupled photons are reduced to zero. In fact, such a bound, coupled, as in a standing wave, photon/antiphoton pair makes a basic spin, 2 graviton. However, in the vacuum, virtual photons are appearing, creation, and disappearing, annihilation, all the time, at incredible rates. Further, from the standpoint of gravitobiology, we state that these virtual photons are also coupling, modulating each other, and decoupling, demodulating, all the time, again at an incredible rate. The virtual photons are coupling and decoupling, modulating and demodulating, with each other at such intense rapidity that to speak of a fixed spin, 2 coupling ignores the fact that it is really only an averaged coupling that stably exists. Any number of photons can simultaneously modulate, and they do. And just as quickly, they decouple. Hence the number of instantaneously coupled photons at a point in the vacuum is always dynamically changing over a very great range of values. Further, continual decoupling of these coupled photons also occurs with intense rapidity. The coupled photon ghost form structures in the vacuum are always continually being annihilated, as well as created. In his fastest observation, of course, the macroscopic observer Delex observes the sum of a vast number of these virtual photon coupling decouplings. He will thus detect only the average coupling. The upshot is that on the average, the number of photons in each graviton may appear to the macroscopic observer to be stabilized at some value between 0 and infinity, including fractional values. Further, one can now speak of the distribution of the coupled photon ghost forms, and hence of graviton spin value in local observer spacetime. One can also speak of the relative density of any particular local ghost form in the vacuum, seemingly the instantaneous local density of that ghost form with respect to the macroscopic observer. One also can speak of the reality density of each ghost form in the local vacuum, with respect to its relative density vis-a-vis all the local coupled photon ghost forms, during a unit time interval. For that particular form, one can also speak of its Q or reality stability, that is, how sharply, and hence how stably, something is real. As can be seen, this approach immediately affects our entire conception of virtual and observable physical realities and their relationships and interactions with each other. When a ghost form reaches a sharpness of 1 or more, it has breached the threshold of observable quantum change, and is no longer just a virtual state form. Further, we will shortly find that we can structure and engineer these virtual state-coupled photon ghost forms at will. In gravitobiology, physical reality itself becomes deterministically tunable, changeable, engineerable, and not fixed at all. Physical reality is not like a stone, but rather it is like a stabilized bubble lightly floating on a rushing torrent of water. An observably real form is an equilibrium in the violent flux of the creation and annihilation of virtual state vacuum ghost forms of all kinds, such that it has sufficiently stable density to consistently breach the quantum threshold. To show the basis for this graviton concept, several figures are required. Figure 1 shows the two kinds of electromagnetic energy: 1. Translation, externally acting, electromagnetic energy, and 2. Stress, internally acting, electromagnetic energy. To first order, Figure 2 shows how we consider the photon as a single oscillation of a minimum observable monochromatic electromagnetic wave. Figure 3 shows the coupled photon-antiphoton pair that comprises the basic graviton. On the average, uncurved spacetime is nominally composed of such spin, 2 gravitons. To the first order, a spacetime composed of spin, 2 gravitons is said to be a flat spacetime. However, spacetime in a sense may be regarded as a conglomerate of potentials including the scalar electromagnetic potentials. Therefore the simplest structure of M scalar potentials, trapped electromagnetic energy, is also nominally composed of such spin, 2 gravitons. Note that each of the coupled photons in the graviton may be constantly circling the other at nominal light speed tangentially, but the graviton system itself may be essentially stationary. In other words, the two trapped photons in a simple graviton are like whirling dervishes, spinning and running at top speed in non-translating circles. Of course, the graviton system can also translate as a system. Figure 4 shows this dynamic graviton system concept and Table 1 summarizes it. In addition to spatial linkage of their hidden electromagnetic Whittaker wave contents, gravitons link or exchange contents via harmonic and subharmonic electromagnetic frequency chains. Thus one has photon communication, translation, between gravitons in two fashions: 1. Horizontally, along spatial wavelength chains, and 2. Vertically, via harmonic frequencies. Note that horizontal, wavelength, communication is linear, while harmonic, frequency, communication is nonlinear. For that reason, linear media translate horizontally, passing a frequency without changing it, while nonlinear media translate vertically, changing a frequency that is passed. Two kinds of electromagnetic energy: stress and translation. Electromagnetic translation energy does external work. Electromagnetic stress energy does internal work on the medium. Virtual electron. Negative charge going forward in time. Virtual positron. Negative charge going backward in time. The photon as a single oscillation of a minimal carrier wave. Coupled photon-antiphoton pair, simplest graviton. The potential is composed of gravitons, whose structures consist of bound photons and antiphotons. The graviton vacuum potential. Photon translates at the speed of light. Scalar potential is static. Trapped charge. Trapped photons virtual. How do you trap photon? Make graviton. Electromagnetic scalar potential is made of gravitons. Vacuum space-time medium is made of gravitons. Graviton is a piece of vacuum medium. The scalar electromagnetic potential may be regarded as an infinite set of pairs of bidirectional electromagnetic planar waves, where the two members of each pair are multiplied together, totally modulating each other. Figures 5, 6, and 7 show this effect. Tesla's standing columnar wave. Note, shape may be all above or all below ambient vacuum potential. The Whittaker standing potential wave. Info LD electromagnetic structure of the Whittaker beam. Destructive and constructive interference. Destructive interference of photons enfolds them as electromagnetic structures inside gravitons, i.e., it constructs gravitons. Destructive interference of gravitons outfolds the internal electromagnetic structures, i.e., it constructs ordinary electromagnetics. In a scalar electromagnetic potential, the electromagnetic energy communicates vertically, which is harmonic translation of frequency energies, or time-wise. The time-wise two-wave electromagnetic energy communication represents a stress upon the rate of flow of local observer time, hence it represents gravitational stress. Further, the local rate of flow of time is determined by this local time stress of vacuum potential. One can easily engineer the harmonic bidirectional wave structure of the vacuum potential. When one does so, then one also curves local space-time, deterministically structures that local curvature with selected hidden variable electromagnetic engines, changes the local rate of flow of time, gravitationally affects local systems, and dynamically structures that local gravitational change to affect different system structures at will. Immediately this graviton concept focuses intensive attention to the nonlinear aspects of the problem, and hence to modulation and demodulation. Nonlinear materials, after all, are materials which directly exhibit the production of harmonics from a fundamental, as shown in Figure 8. However, as previously pointed out, production of harmonics affects the time stress and the local rate of flow of time in an area. This is a gravitational effect, and hence nonlinear electromagnetic actions contain gravitational action components. Nonlinear materials can and do void the mutual exclusivity of classical electromagnetic and gravity fields, and interact in a unified field manner. Nonlinear materials produce harmonics. Also, in a true time-reversed situation, nonlinear materials can exhibit the production of a stronger fundamental from a combination of the fundamental and its harmonics, as shown in Figure 9. Thus there is a very clear difference between a true time-reversed electromagnetic wave and an ordinary electromagnetic wave with the same envelope and directional characteristics, contrary to most of the present treatments in physics. The latter case, pseudo-conjugation, is not all true conjugation. Figure 10 shows a comparison of phase conjugate mirror reflection and standard mirror reflection. Figure 11 shows the four-wave mixing concept by means of which the energy in pump waves A1 and A2 is utilized to produce an amplified phase conjugate replica wave A3 in response to the weak input signal wave A4. This gives a powerful means for producing and amplifying the time-reversed wave. So a graviton is regarded as a particle, cell, of the vacuum and of the space-time medium. It is in fact any one of the ghost forms we previously referred to. But it is not a sternly fixed, quantized fundamental particle, in the sense presently used in physics. Instead, the graviton is like a quivering balloon or jelly-like cell in the vacuum medium, with many input and output pipes, coupling and decoupling waves, in and out. The instantaneous size and composition of the balloon, the graviton cell, depends upon a multiplicity of internal states and their exchanges. A relatively stable graviton cell such as the nominal spin, 2 graviton represents only an envelope of the average equilibrium state of multi-photon coupling in a dynamic coupling and decoupling photon flux. A new kind of interferometry. Stokes' principle of time reversibility. Figure 9. Time reversal of a fundamental plus harmonics can produce a stronger fundamental. Figure 10. Ordinary mirror reflection versus phase conjugate mirror reflection. Figure 11. Pumped phase conjugate mirror, PPCM. The pumped phase conjugate mirror material acts as a triode amplifier. Pumping and four-wave mixing allows strong amplification. The phase conjugate replica A3 of signal input A4 may contain up to all the energy in A1 and A2. Thus the graviton is the average coupled photon structured cell of the local vacuum electromagnetic potential. When the graviton, average, spin is 2, the local spacetime is flat and uncurved. All that the concept of flat spacetime means is that the predominant average activity of the virtual photons of the local vacuum flux is simply the coupling and decoupling of pairs of single photons and single antiphotons. When the graviton, average, spin is less than or greater than 2, the local spacetime is curved, and electromagnetics and gravity are no longer mutually exclusive. Spin less than 2 gives curvature in one manner, and spin greater than 2 gives curvature in the opposite manner. All that the concept of curved spacetime means is that the predominant average activity of the virtual photons of the local vacuum flux involves either, 1. Increased decoupling and decreased coupling of photon-antiphoton pairs, negative curvature, graviton spin less than 2, or, 2. Decreased decoupling and increased coupling of photon-lantiphoton pairs, positive curvature, graviton spin more than 2. In quantum mechanics, any electromagnetic frequency even in a single quantum now must be regarded as continually having internal dynamic exchanges subharmonically and harmonically. Indeed, each photon wavelength, single oscillation, must be considered as a graviton cell having its own spectral content. At the same time, it is also a part of the spectral content of many other graviton cells. Note that this describes a holographic connection and interaction. It also accounts for the fact that the photon stubbornly refuses to act solely as a simple, localized particle. One therefore regards photons as single wavelengths of waves, to the first order. One regards the vacuum as composed of harmonic bidirectional wave structures, always marvelously and dynamically varying at incredible rapidity. This photon-structured vacuum permits the inclusion of internalized ordered photon structure in spacetime, in quantum change itself. Accordingly, the fundamental quantum mechanics postulate that quantum change is random must be changed. Since there now may exist hidden subquantal and quantal orders within the randomness, the altered postulate must state that quantum change is chaotic. This produces an already chaotic quantum mechanics, and resolves one of its most pressing foundation's difficulties, that of the missing chaos. It turns out that these changes to general relativity and quantum mechanics unite them into a single unified conceptual approach. However, they also implement to the hilt a vital hidden variable theory and a graviton, structured potential, to include the quantum potential, which can yield action at a distance. Now non-local effects are also subject to deterministic engineering. Quantum potential characteristics. No point source. Not radiated. Quantum potential between particles. Interaction does not vanish as spatial separation becomes very large. Instantaneous connection. Depends on quantum state of system as a whole. System parts can be greatly separated. Hidden variable theory quantum potential. A quantum particle moves as if it were subject, in addition to external potentials, to a potential which is a function of its own probability distribution. Bohm's hidden variable theory assumes particle and wave function real and separate. Wave function obeys Schrödinger's equation. Particle obeys classical mechanics. Particle couples to wave function through a quantum potential. By far the most significant electromagnetic biological effects occurring in and on a biological system are due to its gravitobiological, internalized multiphotonic, exchanges. There are great differences between single photon, monochromatic, interactions and multiphoton interactions. A priori the very notion and the physical selection of a monochromatic single photon interaction assumes that the multiphoton coupling of the graviton has already been destroyed. This discards any notion of a consistent and persistent graviton structure, since a monochromatic photon does not independently exist until its coupling shell graviton is destroyed or excluded. Spectral. Harmonics, interactions, on the other hand, may well involve substantial and profound multi-photon, info-LDing, and outfolding effects that do not appear at all in monochromatic interactions. A dramatic extension of photobiology is involved in gravitobiology. In the new model, permissibly the linked internal structure of spacetime may be partially ordered deterministically. This internally structured spacetime underlies quantum change itself and is available for dynamic utilization and manipulation by living systems. This is particularly significant since the living system, its cells, and all its subcellular and multicellular parts deliberately utilize deterministic internal communication, Whittaker photon exchange, through the medium of the hidden internal electromagnetic photon structures of stabilized gravitons comprising scalar potentials. In short, for its living communication and control of both mental and physical processes, the biological system utilizes internalized electromagnetic energy in hidden harmonic Whittaker photon channels inside scalar potentials. Of course, externally one can also directly engineer a harmonic photon/wave structure and enfold it as a hidden stress pattern structuring of Whittaker potentials. Such externally engineered Whittaker-Dyatlov signals provide a totally new and startling capability to directly and deterministically enter into all the biological organism's hidden internal control and communication systems, both physical and mental. With this approach, all internal living biophysical and biomental processes are now open to external engineering, manipulation, and control. Further, this is already well known to the Soviets as evidenced by the work of Dyatlov, Khaznachayev, and others. We strongly point out that gravitobiology deals with the dynamic structuring, tailoring, and engineering of the vacuum state itself, including the virtual state, spacetime, and subquantal and quantal change. Since all physical observables may be regarded as collections or integrations of subquantal and quantal changes, we are now dealing with the ability to directly structure, tailor, manipulate, and engineer physical reality itself. Also note particularly that the living aspects of a biosystem, mind, thoughts, memories, lives, emotions, personality, etc., themselves may be regarded as equilibria and dynamic structures in the deeper nested levels of the virtual particle flux of vacuum/spacetime. We have long pointed out that mind and matter share one real dimension in common, that of time. In structuring the vacuum and the curvature of spacetime, one is also producing a substructure in time itself in both mind and matter. Accordingly, vacuum engineering, gravitobiology, implies that we are also dealing with the ability to directly structure, tailor, manipulate, and engineer mind, emotions, personality, deeper mental reality, and life itself. The implications for technology development and consequently for humanity itself are awesome, both for good and for evil. For the good, we now see a breathtaking vista where a simple, cheap, and ready cure for almost any disease or health disorder will eventually become available. We see eventually the direct capability to access such heretofore excluded areas as all conscious and unconscious mental functioning, emotions, intelligence, memory, both short-term and long-term, and personality itself. Eventually education will be by direct loading of proper software. Even a severe personality disorder will be directly and quickly correctable. Even more astounding, it should be possible to reverse the aging process itself. Also note that, quantum mechanically, mechanics is electromagnetic at its basis, since exchange of virtual photons generates all mechanical forces. Thus even the mechanical aspects of disease, crippling, twisted spines, shortened and gnarled limbs, physical malfunctions, physical defects, etc., all will be directly treatable and curable. For the bad, we see a mind-numbing vista where men can, the Soviets already have done so, utilize electrogravitobiology, EGB, for terrible new mass weapons of electromagnetic biological warfare. The means for ultimate human enslavement, absolute mental manipulation and control from external means can be developed, and this will certainly be noticed by would-be dictators and megalomaniacs. the ability to develop and utilize electromagnetic disease-inducing and immediate death-inducing scalar electromagnetic weapons has already been developed by the Soviet Union in secret KGB laboratories. We will not dwell extensively on the potential horrors of such electromagnetic biological warfare. With the new weapons, any nation on Earth can be devastated physically, mentally, or both relatively simply and in short order, with tens and even hundreds of millions of prompt casualties. We point out that small tactical electromagnetic biological warfare death ray weapons have already been clandestinely tested by the Soviets in Afghanistan, accounting for the smirch or instant kill nerve gas attacks so-called. When a body was struck by this weapon, not a single twitch or movement resulted in it thereafter, ever again. Not a single nerve impulse firing occurred, ever again, in the struck body. Every cell, bacterium, virus, paramecium, etc. in the entire body was instantly dead. The body simply fell like a limp dish rag and lay crumpled and still where it fell. A decisive signature of this weapon was that, with every cell and bacterium dead, the dead bodies did not decay for a very extended period, even 30 days, precisely as if they had been deeply irradiated with cobalt-60 nuclear, gamma, radiation. No gas or chemical attack can do that. The weapons vista for this entire area, which the Soviet refer to overall as energetics, is sobering. Khrushchev himself stated to the Presidium in 1960 that these new, fantastic weapons then in Soviet development could wipe out all life on Earth if unrestrainedly used. One strongly suspects that Khrushchev was referring to the electromagnetic biological warfare directed energy weapon, DU, aspects of energetics. In the 1975 SALT talks, Leonid Brezhnev even tried to get an agreement for banning the development of such new mass weapons. He personally met with visiting senators and other congressional leaders to point out the pressing and urgent need for limitations on these new weapons. In fact, he called them weapons more frightful than the mind of man has ever imagined. That same year, Gromyko introduced to the United Nations General Assembly a draft treaty for the ban of these mass destruction weapons, and urged the nations of the world to sign it as a most urgent matter. Unfortunately, the rest of the world simply did not understand what the Russians were talking about, thus one has great qualms and much personal anguish when even approaching this gruesome area. Certainly that is true for this analyst. Were it not for the fact that the Soviets have already discovered and highly weaponized these electromagnetic biological warfare effects, I most certainly would turn my attention firmly away from this entire area. However, such frightful electromagnetic biological warfare directed energy weapons have already been secretly developed and deployed by the Soviets. For over 3 decades they have used our reaction or non-reaction to the weak electromagnetic biological warfare against personnel in the U.S. Embassy in Moscow to gauge our knowledge or lack of it of unified electromagnetic gravity biological warfare. In the nearly unthinkable event that war should break out between the Soviet Union and the West will simply be immediately devastated by these eerie, mind-numbing electromagnetic biological warfare weapons before it even knows what hit it. When we have absolutely no counters, such attack becomes a preferred Soviet option and very likely. A wide range of options is available to the Soviet Union in utilization of both electromagnetic biological warfare directed energy weapons and conventional biological warfare agents. Clandestine, slow biological warfare attacks can be so insidiously hidden and cleverly employed that the Western nations, because of their present scientific and intelligence shortfalls and biases, will not even comprehend that the biological weapon's slow strike on several fronts and employing differing agents and methodologies was deliberate, until it is far too late to do anything about it. I firmly believe that, one way or another, such a clandestine slow biological warfare strike, using viral and bacteriological agents and electromagnetic biological weapon-directed energy weapons augmentation as well, is already well underway against us. Further, it is still totally unrecognized as such by the West. Nonetheless, there is still great hope. If this nation wakes from its lethargy and puts its mind to it, gravitobiology can be quickly developed. Slow, and even prompt, biological weapon attack can then easily be countered. Unless gravitobiology is developed, we do not have now, and we shall not have in the foreseeable future, any effective defenses whatsoever to a biological weapon attack, whether clandestine or open, and whether by conventional biological warfare agents or electromagnetic biological warfare directed energy weapons. The scientific and engineering mindset and the need for a little highly unorthodox electromagnetic gravitobiology effort is all that presently blocks us from quickly achieving sufficient defensive capabilities for parity in this absolutely vital area. Leaving the weapons aside for a moment, the new technology's positive benefits to mankind can be enormous, far more beneficial than the mind of man has ever imagined, to paraphrase Brezhnev. The control and vanquishing of all the ravaging illnesses and diseases is there, available for us to develop and employ for the benefit of everyone on earth, and for our children yet to come. The vista of complete and thorough education for everyone economically and universally available is also something that has never existed but will now become possible, since eventually the necessary software and operating systems for any human skill or field can be directly loaded, so to speak. With a developed knowledge of the external and internal energy balances of our biosphere, we can clean up the biosphere, permanently rid ourselves and our children of poisonous chemical and nuclear wastes, and restore the vitality of the planet for our living health and enjoyment. But make no mistake, this technology will give us the capability to engineer reality itself, both physical reality, life, and mind. And we will be able to engineer it to be either a heaven or a hell. The choice is strictly up to us. Faced with the looming advent of this new science, certain of my associates and I have striven over the last 4 years to obtain funding for a major research institute, to develop scalar electromagnetics, gravitobiology, and novel energy and anti-gravity devices for the betterment of mankind. However, all our efforts have been thwarted. It has become increasingly apparent that the present scientific and control mindsets are so strongly entrenched, and so dedicated to suppressing any such attempt to break the economic and technological stranglehold on our citizenry, that the vision of such an institute is just a dream and not to be taken seriously. Consequently, I have reluctantly concluded that this information must be openly released, for that is the only remaining way to overcome the solid barrier against the new technology and its benevolent use for humankind. I believe that a well-informed, concerned citizen is also a good thing for democracy and our free way of government. At least if there are frightful dangers facing us and terrible reefs to be avoided, let us know what the dangers are and where the reefs are. In that vein, this paper is reluctantly written and circulated. This technology, of which only a tiny glimpse is provided here, is truly a force amplifier of vast gain. It is a massive amplifier for both good and evil, for any knife cuts both ways. How any tool is utilized depends upon the hand and intent of the user, not upon the tool itself. Every tool is amoral, and only humans apply it morally or immorally. Gravitobiology conceptually points the way to unleashing some of the most formidable tools ever conceived. Let us fervently pray that wisdom will prevail and these new tools will be utilized for man's good, to heal him and not to kill him. Man is upon the threshold of a crisis between the good and evil sides of his nature that is unparalleled in all human history. Whatever the reader's faith, I ask for your prayers. Most assuredly they will be sorely needed in the days to come. Tom Bearden. January 1991. Woodpeckers, a Soviet bicentennial present to the U.S. On July 4, 1976, the Soviet Union presented the United States of America with a most unusual bicentennial present. On that date, extremely powerful Soviet transmitters were energized in the communications band, 3 to 30 MHz, causing interference with communications all over the world. The chirp signals of the new transmitters gave them a most peculiar sound, very much like that of a woodpecker's beak striking a flat block of wood. Ham operators immediately dubbed these new monster transmitters woodpeckers. Official protests by the various nations did little good. The Soviets insisted that the woodpecker transmitters were experimental and necessary. The woodpecker transmitters continued to pour out their bothersome worldwide interference, and they do so to this day. Misidentification as an over-the-horizon radar. The U.S. Department of Defense, DoD, scientists and engineers proclaimed the new monster Soviet transmitters to be simply over-the-horizon, OTH, radar transmitters. Of course, signals in the communication band will reflect off the Earth's ionosphere, so that the signals can be transmitted beyond the radio horizon, reflecting around the Earth in multiple bounces within the Earth ionospheric waveguide. For that reason, over-the-horizon radars commonly utilize one or more such frequencies. However, there are certain fairly stringent limitations on an over-the-horizon radar that are evidenced in its signals. While the woodpeckers usually exhibit those characteristics, often they also exhibit a great many other characteristics that would be useless or even detrimental to purely over-the-horizon radar functioning. Therefore, the consensus among many analysts, including, for example, one or more of our most knowledgeable over-the-horizon radar experts, is that the woodpeckers can function as over-the-horizon radars if need be, but their primary purpose appears to be far more complicated than over-the-horizon radar sensing and ranging. Officially, however, the U.S. Department of Defense and the U.S. intelligence communities still label the Soviet woodpeckers as over-the-horizon radars. Immediate weather engineering over North America. For the next decade after the initial operational capability advent of the Soviet woodpeckers in 1976, the weather over North America was highly anomalous. In fact, the prestigious journal Science eventually pointed out that such an anomalous weather decade could be expected only once in 1200 years. During this anomalous decade, of course, the woodpecker transmitters were very active. Indeed, their beams regularly intersected over the United States in an interference grid. Finer interferometry patterns within this overall interference grid were used to create and move high-pressure and low-pressure areas over desired areas in the U.S., steering and controlling the giant jet streams over the U.S. and directing the course of U.S. weather. The present author has fully documented and explained the use of the woodpeckers in the weather control mode. Further, we have long documented the use of the woodpeckers as highly unusual directed energy weapons. In addition, we have pointed out the Soviet capability to utilize the woodpecker weapon systems to produce biological effects, but have not heretofore given a full explanation of the exact electromagnetic mechanism for that capability. In this paper we present a more technical explanation of the biological effects of scalar electromagnetics, including as utilized by Soviet weapon systems such as the 14-year-old woodpeckers, and the decades-long Soviet microwave radiation of personnel in the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. For details of the embassy radiation, see brochure, Johns Hopkins University's study of the health status of embassy personnel, the U.S. Commerce Department's funded study of the radiation, and other references. Given a dose of their own medicine. After some time, the aggravated ham operators banded together and formed a group action. Many of them recorded the woodpecker's signals on tape and, at a prearranged time, suddenly turned all their transmitters on with the tapes playing, transmitting back to the woodpecker receivers the taped replicas of their own jamming signals. The woodpecker transmitters were observed to become confused. They frantically changed channels and desperately tried to avoid the ham operators' transmitted replica signals. Unable to do so, finally the woodpeckers went off the air completely. Thereafter a modicum of caution began to be utilized by the woodpeckers. They changed channels frequently so as not to jam one ham channel continually, and substantially decreased their degree of interference with other communications equipments. Also, electronic filters to add onto one's receiver and filter out the woodpecker's annoying chirps were produced in the West and made available to ham operators and other communications groups. An uneasy truce resulted, and there the matter rests today, insofar as communications is concerned. The woodpeckers have continued to operate at will. Launch phase anti-bomber and anti-missile weapons. In latter 1985 and early 1986, the Soviet Union employed the internalized electromagnetic energy capabilities of the woodpecker weapon systems to directly attack, disable, and destroy a series of U.S. aircraft and missiles. We shall address internalized electromagnetic energy shortly. We have previously documented these overt Soviet acts of war and will not repeat that documentation here. We have also pointed out that 1985 was the specific Soviet target year to have all these weapons online and ready to go, as specifically stated by Leonid Brezhnev at a secret meeting of European Communist Party leaders in Prague in 1972. Indeed, at that time Brezhnev actually confirmed that détente was part of a deliberate Soviet deception plan. How this paper came about. Recently a frequent correspondent who is knowledgeable in ham radio and well familiar with the annoyance of interfering signals from the powerful Soviet woodpecker transmitters in the communications band, 3 to 30 MHz, sent me a Federal Communications Commission, FCC, compilation of Soviet woodpecker signal radiations and requested my comments. The editor of an important journal in England also urgently requested more definitive information on the woodpecker's biological warfare capabilities. I quickly dashed off short responses to these two correspondents, but I realized that the biological capabilities of electromagnetic transmitters, including the woodpeckers, required a more lengthy paper to provide an adequate explanation. This paper is a much expanded version of my responses to those two correspondents. Its purpose is to more fully reveal precisely how the Soviets can utilize electromagnetic transmitters such as the woodpeckers to transmit biological effects including any kind of cellular death or disease whatsoever and induce and create these effects in a targeted distant population. In this paper we will detail some of the powerful electromagnetic biological warfare capabilities of electromagnetic transmitters, including the woodpecker weapons systems. This will complete our expose of the unsuspected capabilities of the woodpeckers. First, the concerned US scientists should recognize that Soviet scientists, particularly those who work on highly secret Soviet electromagnetic biological warfare weapons projects, do not utilize the type of biophysics known to Western scientists. Instead, they have applied a unified electromagnetic gravitobiology field theory, called energetics, to photobiology and created a new, highly classified Soviet biophysics which this author refers to as gravitobiology. Accordingly, to understand the real, classified Soviet biophysics, the concerned US scientist must be prepared to, 1. Acquire extensive new knowledge and a drastically different technical viewpoint, 2. Search Western orthodox and unorthodox scientific literature in photobiology and unified quantum field theory physics, to discover potential candidate areas that the Soviets may have developed and applied, and, 3. Look behind the deliberate deception involved in most openly published Soviet biophysics papers and search for possible significant clues. First, he or she should read and digest the two Whittaker papers, ponder what is meant by Dovyakov's information content of the field in light of Whittaker's info-LD electromagnetic structuring of the scalar potential, and Kazanachiev's extensive cytopathogenic work in electromagnetic induction of cellular death and disease at a distance. Next, he or she should study the implications of time reversal in physics, and the potential implications of utilizing in biology the time-reversed, phase-conjugated, electromagnetic waves which the US discovered in the open Soviet scientific literature in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Finally, he or she should study the photobiology work of West German scientists such as Popp. Those references should be studied first. Then he or she should study in detail the difference between Heaviside's-Gibbs vector electromagnetic curtailment of Maxwell's theory and the original quaternion Maxwell theory, because the Heaviside-Gibbs theory, the present classical electromagnetic theory, is only a subset of Maxwell's actual unified electromagnetic gravitobiology field theory. Finally, by combining all this information and reiterating the study of the reference material until it can be successfully integrated in one's understanding, one has the basis of the whole banana of Soviet gravitobiology, so to speak. One then has the basis of unified electromagnetic gravitobiology theory, energetics, with which the Soviets started some 40 years ago and the beginning of which Maxwell had already published in 1873. From that foundation, it's not too terribly difficult for a good laboratory team to piece together the theory and gradually develop practical, working hardware on the laboratory bench. Technical basis for Soviet electromagnetic biological warfare are scientists in the State Department, Department of Defense, Central Intelligence Agency, DIA, FCC and other U.S. governmental agencies are never going to understand the full biological warfare capabilities of electromagnetic transmitters such as the woodpeckers or develop new instruments to measure what specific biological information their signals really contain until they understand scalar electromagnetics. Ordinary, classical, electromagnetics was produced by Heaviside and Gibbs in a substantially truncated version of Maxwell's true quaternion electromagnetic theory, as previously pointed out by this author. Ordinary electromagnetic, and its externalized energy, cannot exhibit the capabilities we are referring to, or produce such biological death and disease ray results as are possible with specialized scalar electromagnetic transmitters. Instead, one must recover and utilize the scalar part of Maxwell's quaternion electromagnetic theory, the portion that was discarded by Heaviside and Gibbs. Maxwell's original theory was a unified theory of electromagnetic and gravity, with the electrogravitational aspects being captured by info-LDing functions of the vector electric and magnetic force fields inside the scalar component of the quaternion. Thus Maxwell's quaternion theory, for example, also prescribed scalar waves of pure potential, trapped, electromagnetic energy, where this potential energy contained hidden, deterministically structured, internal bidirectional electromagnetic wave patterns yet no externally, and B-field force resultants appeared in the overall vector summation envelope. This can readily be seen by simple examination of the scalar component of the quaternion. This pure scalar potential, wave, with a hidden deterministic electromagnetic wave substructure aspect was completely discarded by Heaviside and Gibbs. It is still discarded by classical vector electromagnetics theory today, even though it is experimentally verifiable and testable and engineerable. Scalar electromagnetics, however, is a unified field theory of electromagnetics and gravitation, since it recaptures the scalar wave portion of electromagnetics that was erroneously discarded by Heaviside and Gibbs. In short, scalar electromagnetic captures, enfolds, and hides deterministic M waves inside electromagnetic scalar potentials and also then interferes the structured scalar potentials to outfold the electromagnetic energy and recover it at a distance. That distant interference recovery, however, can be in the form of either negative, time-reversed, or positive electromagnetic energy, merely by how one biases the ground potential of the scalar interferometer relative to the ambient potential in the distant interference region. Since it is known that potentials are gravitational, they are composed of trapped energy and energy is gravitational, then scalar electromagnetic is a unified field theory of electromagnetics and gravitation. Obviously these unified scalar fields with their hidden internal structures have a great many more capabilities and uses than do the far more restricted classical electromagnetic force fields. For 4 decades the Soviets have secretly developed this scalar electromagnetics gravitobiology theory and technology which they call energetics and have used it to develop and deploy secret unified field theory, UFT, superweapons of enormous power and startling capabilities. Biological implications. The info-LD'd, deterministic, hidden electromagnetic wave structure inside the scalar electromagnetic potential is called the information content of the field by Soviet scientists. The Soviets know that it is this info-LD'd and hidden electromagnetic structure, the internalized or covered electromagnetic energy of the potential field, that is deterministically utilized by living biological systems in all their cellular control and regulatory functions. Thus by deliberately manipulating this internalized electromagnetic energy structure of the scalar electromagnetic potential, the Soviets have found it possible to accomplish astounding electromagnetic biological effects both for healing and for biological warfare that are entirely undreamed of in the West. The Soviet energetics technology can manipulate, change, control, or destroy literally any of the key biological functions of the living system, including mental and behavioral functions. Internal and external electromagnetic energy. In his 1903 Mathematisk Analyse paper, Whittaker demonstrates a standing, spatially fixed wave of pure potential, but one with an info-LD'd, highly dynamic, hidden electromagnetic force field substructure containing hidden bidirectional pairs of electromagnetic wave energy. Again, see Figure 6 for a diagrammatic portrayal of this Whittaker wave, scalar electromagnetic wave. In the diagram, in each pair of info-LD electromagnetic waves, the two coupled waves flow in opposite directions inside the standing potential wave. Further, their speed is not limited to the normal speed of light in vacuum. In each pair, the two waves are multiplied together. Hence they modulate each other, locking together into graviton waves rather than photon waves. Each paired electromagnetic planar wave couplet is a hidden electromagnetic stress energy channel in vacuum spacetime, and in this channel electromagnetic energy flows in either direction, in fact, in both directions at once. Further, there is continual constructive and destructive interference of these two waves, yielding continual coupling into pairs of photons and decoupling into photon-antiphoton pairs. In short, continual creation and annihilation of spin, two gravitons is occurring. A scalar potential, then, is composed of this dynamic structure. Taking the Whittaker approach to the lowest level possible, this author has previously presented a unified field development of photon-antiphoton structures inside gravitons, unifying gravitation and electromagnetics at the most fundamental level, that of the quantum particles of the fields. Figures 1, 2, 3, and 4 develop this unified particles approach. The bottom line is this: there are two fundamental kinds of electromagnetic energy. First, there is externalized electromagnetic energy. This is the normal wave envelope electromagnetic force field translation energy that acts externally upon each charged particle, to translate the particle as a single unit. The resulting unitary changes, translations, of charged particles as wholes produce the normal electromagnetic interactions upon things and objects, as seen by the external observer. Indeed, this process is external observation, and external observation is this process. Second, there is also internalized electromagnetic energy, where electromagnetic forces act in antiparallel pairs. This electromagnetic stress energy pattern acts internally upon a charged particle or medium, specifically structuring the virtual particle flux exchange of the particle with the vacuum, or of the medium with the vacuum. This vacuum exchange with the particle, of course, constitutes the charge of the particle. The electric charge of a particle is due to the exchange of virtual photons between the vacuum and the mass of the particle. Note that the Whittaker structure represents deterministic structuring of this vacuum exchange with the mass of the charged particle. It represents deterministic structuring of massless electric flux itself, in electromagnetic terms, and this does not presently appear in electrical physics theory. Instead, orthodox theory assumes that the structuring is random, when in fact it is not from Whittaker's work. Western scientists do not normally even detect or recognize this internalized electromagnetic energy. Our instruments normally see only the gross static electromagnetic potential energy by actualizing it into gradients, force fields, that translate charged particles. External electromagnetic energy is the face that the scalar electromagnetic potential exhibits in its outer bulk interactions with gross matter. Internal electromagnetic energy is the face that the scalar electromagnetic potential exhibits in its inner interactions with the virtual particle flux of the vacuum and with every charged particle in the universe, most especially with the charged particles in the nuclei of atoms. Internal electromagnetic energy is the info-LD electromagnetic stress energy inside the vacuum potential. Note that all scalar electromagnetic potentials are vacuum potentials. Deterministically structuring the info-LD electromagnetic planar waves in the Whittaker structure of the vacuum potential is vacuum engineering. It is also structuring the local spacetime, and curving it whenever the Whittaker potential differs from the potential of ambient vacuum spacetime. In our present engineering, at best we see only the gross envelope or bulk translation energy, overall charging or draining energy, of the electromagnetic potential, trapped electromagnetic energy, that was exhibited by translating charged particles. We never detect the dynamic, hidden, bidirectional wave electromagnetic substructure content and interactions of the electromagnetic vacuum potential. This undetected internalized electromagnetic energy that is info-LD'd inside the scalar potential is electrogravitational energy, since all electromagnetic potentials are gravitational in nature, as is well known. Vacuum engineering and activation. Note that the vacuum spacetime consists only of internalized, info-LD'd, virtual, energy. Every particle, wave, etc. that exists or moves in the vacuum continually internally exchanges with the vacuum flux, since in fact every entity itself is only a special kind of equilibrium state in this vacuum flux. Everything, so to speak, is simply a special kind of fragile balloon in a many-pipe flow situation. If the vacuum that an entity exists or moves in is deterministically structured, the vacuum exchange with the internal energy of the entity is structured. Just as changing the colors of the flows into and out of the balloon will gradually change the color of the balloon, the entity will gradually charge up its internal energy to any persistent change in the vacuum's virtual particle flux. This charging process is called activation. If the vacuum exchange then changes back to normal, the structure of the internal electromagnetic energy of the entity will gradually return to normal. The entity then is said to have discharged, with respect to the new pattern or structure it had charged up with previously. Discharge is also called deactivation. The mass of an observable entity is a direct indication of its degree of total exchange with the vacuum. Since most of the mass of an atom is in its nucleus, then one is particularly interested in the activation and deactivation of the nucleus, for that is where the process largely occurs. The deterministically structured potential reaches directly to the nucleus of the atom, and the interaction between internal structuring is far greater in the nucleus than in the electron shells of the atom. The nuclear charge spreads. As the nucleus charges up with a new vacuum potential pattern, its electromagnetic coupling with the electron shells gradually is changed also, producing electron changes, of a wide variety, as well. Activated masses atoms, nuclei, ions, neutrons, and electrons, for example, can then exhibit quite abnormal external chemical, electrical, and gravitational interactions as compared to unactivated, normal, inert masses. If there is any sort of deterministic pattern in the activation, the activated nuclei can act very differently in their electrical, chemical, and nuclear interactions. Thus the internal energy structure of everything that exists or moves through the vacuum, every particle, wave, etc., interacts with the internal structure of the potential, space-time. Everything is continually charging and discharging internally. Any change in the info-LD'd Whittaker structuring of the local vacuum potential will gradually activate everything virtual or observable existing or moving locally through that region. Activation of photons. If one wishes to produce strongly activated photons that have a selected internal energy structure, one first produces a scalar electromagnetic potential with that structure and activates matter, atomic nuclei, with it. Then one uses four-wave mixing in that material to evoke a highly amplified phase conjugate replica wave in response to a weak signal wave. The highly amplified replica will internally contain a strong replica of the selected structure. Electromagnetic waves whose potentials are comprised of such activated photons can be produced and transmitted. When this activated wave is absorbed in a distant target, its internalized electromagnetic interaction will deposit this selected structure in the target mass. Gradually that internal activation structure will diffuse through the mass, particularly its atomic nuclei, then its lattice structure, so that the target becomes activated as well, with the desired pattern. Continued irradiation of the target will result in a certain equilibrium charge level for that selected activation structure, partial potential, being present in equilibrium in the atomic nuclei of the target. Electromagnetic coupling to the electron shells and further interatomic interaction gradually activates the material lattice of the target with that Whittaker structure. When external photon interactions now occur with the activated target material, kindling of the hidden virtual state order may produce sufficient coherent integration to breach the quantum threshold and produce observable physical change. This will produce an anomalous change with respect to normal macroscopic interactions. Physical reality itself has been directly engineered and altered. For specialized applications, extremely intense pulses with selected internal energy substructures can be generated. When these strike a target, immediate and intense effects can be obtained, particularly in the atomic nuclei. Fissioning of a nuclear material, for example, can be directly accomplished by this process. With slightly less intense application, specific cellular diseases or behavioral patterns can be promptly induced in biological systems. Western physicists missed it in experimental physics. Western scientists have been preoccupied with ever more subtle detection of charged particles translated by the externalized envelope energy of electromagnetic waves and potential gradients. They have not recognized that, 1. Gravitational potential stress always has a hidden electromagnetic substructure, the greatest portion of this substructure is electromagnetic, and, 3. That hidden electromagnetic substructure can be deliberately controlled and utilized to manipulate particles, atomic nuclei, and gross matter, both living and non-living, in ways that are completely impossible with the present envelope translation electromagnetics. The hidden electromagnetic stress substructure can be deliberately engineered by composing it of a proper deterministic set of electromagnetic waves and signals, and info-LDing these together with their equal phase conjugates into a modulation and standing wave resonance process. This produces an artificial or internally patterned/activated potential with the desired Whittaker bidirectional electromagnetic wave structure hidden inside. Since earliest times, living systems have utilized these internal electromagnetic energy channels and performed such vacuum engineering by info-LDing. Because we have not recognized or measured this internalized electromagnetic energy in biology and physics, we have heretofore completely failed to penetrate to the active info-LD'd electromagnetic signals and hidden electromagnetic control mechanisms of living biological systems, literally because our present instruments cannot detect and measure their functioning nor the hidden electromagnetic energy they utilize. Chaos, hidden order underlying randomness. Because we have been preoccupied with externalized electromagnetic interactions, we have been reductionist in our outlook upon physical reality. Accordingly, we have built a present physical science and biology that is almost completely reductionist, i.e., we believe that the whole is just the sum of the parts, and that is all there is to it. However, the interactions of internalized electromagnetic stress energy transcends reductionism. Then the whole is no longer just the sum of its parts, but also is changed and affected by the overall nonlinear internal interactions of its parts both with each other and with the whole itself. Then we indeed have a new holographic science whose true ordered nature does not presently appear to us through our crude externalized energy detectors except as chaos, the mysterious presence of hidden order in apparent randomness. When such randomness with hidden order chaos is integrated and collected, surprising and unsuspected order emerges macroscopically. Special implications for quantum mechanics. However, quantum mechanically this implies that there exists hidden order even inside a single quantum of change. That is, the hidden order is subquantal, hence virtual. This tells us that the virtual state itself is ordered by Whittaker structured potential methods. But this changes the interpretation of one of the postulates, fundamental assumptions, of present quantum mechanics itself. Now one must postulate that quantum change is chaotic, rather than purely random. For large collections/integrations of quantum changes, the hidden internal order emerges and stabilizes. Thus quantum change is statistical, but it is not the Gibbs statistics of a random variable, rather, it is chaotic statistics. Since the macroscopic implies large collections/integrations of the virtual, the chaotic statistics of quantum change yields an ordered macroscopic universe that emerges from seemingly random, but actually, already chaotic, microscopic changes. It also resolves one of the burning issues in quantum mechanics today, the problem of the missing chaos. One simply alters the fundamental interpretation of the quantum mechanics postulate that quantum change is statistical to mean that quantum change is chaotic. This places quantum mechanics upon an already chaotic basis, resolving the quantum mechanics foundation's difficulty of the missing chaos. It was already implicit within the theory. Actually, from still another viewpoint, the whole thing should have been apparent long ago. Numerous physicists have struggled with the embarrassing fact that the energy in the gravity field is negative energy. For the gravity field, like charges, that is, all masses, so to speak, attract each other. Their unrestrained attraction does work on the G field between them and increases the energy of the field, potential, at the same time that the kinetic energy of the masses is increased. But conservation of energy states that the energy of the system, kinetic energy of the particles plus the potential energy of the field, must remain constant if there are no other sources or sinks. Hence the increased energy of the gravity field must be negative, since the increased kinetic energy of the particles is positive. To drive these like gravity charges or masses apart, one has to input additional positive energy to the field to cancel some of its negative energy. Therefore one has to expend additional positive energy to separate two masses against the gravity field attraction. In electromagnetics, of course, like charges either electrical or magnetic repel each other, and their unrestrained repulsion weakens the electromagnetic field, potential, energy at the same time that the kinetic energy of the charges is increasing. Conservation of energy of the system thus requires that positive energy goes out of the weakening electromagnetic potential, driving the repelling electrical charges apart and increasing their kinetic energy. This means that the energy of the electric field, potential, is positive. So we now speak of positive, externalized, field energy and negative, internalized, field energy. What we call normal electromagnetic energy is externalized, outfolded, electromagnetic energy. What we call normal gravitational potential is in fact internalized, infolded, electromagnetic energy. This of course is completely consistent with Sakharov's seminal 1968 hypothesis that the gravitational field is not a primary field of nature, but is generated by and composed of other ordinary fields. In fact, to the first order it is generated by, and composed of, infolded electromagnetic fields. Sakharov's hypothesis has led to an explosive development of stochastic gravitation, culminating in the very important papers of Harold Puthoff. Indeed, the modern vacuum is anything but empty, but is filled with Whittaker order and structure, incredible density of disintegrated electromagnetic energy, and violent virtual particle flux of an intensity and density that boggles the imagination. The case of opposite charges in passing, for the purist we briefly point out the case of opposite charges. First, let us look at equal but opposite electrical charges. Electrically, two unlike charges are seen by the external observer to attract each other, and increase the strength of the field. However, charge-wise only. Not mass, each charge is now the antimatter partner, time reversal, of the other. In quantum mechanics, time is not an observable, but only a parameter. Since we never see time but only infer it from observed spatial changes, we will just see the spatial track of the time-reversed forces and the energy situation. Thus we will see mutual time-reversed repulsion which corresponds to mutual attraction as seen by the time-forward observer. The electric field now seems to add negative energy. That is, additional positive energy is seen to be extracted from the electric field, to increase the kinetic energy of the attracting particles, which means that the negative energy of the field is increased. However, the external observer does not see this energy as negative but as positive. He sees the positive energy of the electrical field increased. When unrestrained, two unlike gravitational charges, i.e., a positive mass and a negative mass, act in similar time-reversed fashion. The situation is exactly opposite to the case of the electrical charges and fields. To the forward time external observer, the two unlike gravitational masses will be seen to repel, i.e., to time-reversed attract, each other and decrease the negative energy of the gravitational field between them. We also examine another case, the coherent integration of photons. We choose to regard a photon as a coupled electron-positron pair, in the virtual state. There are now two ways of ordering collections of photons. First, if we parallel order the positrons and parallel order the electrons, this is coherent integration of photons, which is involved in a single electromagnetic sine wave, for example. In this case, we still have all the positive charges opposed to all the negative charges, so the situation remains photons and electromagnetic. In an electromagnetic sine wave, the electric charges are collected in the positive electric field portion of the wave, and the positrons are collected in the negative E field portion of the electromagnetic wave. This wave will always interact with a charged particle, regardless of its phase, atalbut its beginning, ending, and middle zero electric field points. The second way to order collections of photons is to equally collect electrons and positrons. That is, for each electron-positron photon, its antiparticle, its antiphoton, which in this case is a positron-electron photon, is collected with it. Voila! The vertically parallel electrons and positrons attract each other, so that all resultant electric fields of this collection are zeroed, vectorially. Further, each photon-antiphoton pair now has spin, 2, which does not constitute a photon with non-zero electric fields, but a graviton with zeroed electric fields. That is, we have created a pure electrostatic scalar potential, with a hidden internal electromagnetic wave photon coupling-anti-coupling structure. In this coupling, which we have very crudely described, photons-antiphotons are continually coupling and uncoupling. From Whittaker's work, the coupling and uncoupling are phasing, both vertically and horizontally, so that harmonic sets of paired bidirectional electromagnetic waves are seen to be internally moving, photons coherently coupling in one direction and antiphotons coherently coupling in the other, then decoupling, then recoupling, etc., inside the potential. What we have done, in short, is turn electromagnetic energy into gravitational energy. What emerges from all this is a clear principle, which can be demonstrated in the laboratory, with only medium difficulty. The one-to-one addition of an electromagnetic wave and its phase conjugate replica of equal magnitude, results in a gravitational envelope wave of pure scalar potential. In Bohm's terms, it enfolds the electromagnetics into a hidden, ordered electromagnetic structure of a standing gravitational wave. Note that this gives a new view of negative energy versus positive energy. We may state now that positive energy is ordinary, time-forward, outfolded electromagnetic energy, and negative energy is non-ordinary, time-reversed, infolded electromagnetic energy. But if that is true, then one of the cornerstone physics assumptions is false, that is the assumption that a photon and an antiphoton are identical. Indeed, this is false, as this writer has protested for years. Further, it is easily proven that it is false. We do so as follows. First, take a phase conjugate mirror material. We now wish this material to sometimes emit ordinary photons, which it will do, for example, by simply heating it. We also wish it to sometimes emit antiphotons, or time-reversed photons, which it will do when stimulated by absorbing another photon, and emitting a phase conjugate replica. Now we measure the recoil of the mirror material when it emits a photon or antiphoton. That's fairly readily done, a little tricky, but not too difficult. Any decent university lab can do it easily. An interesting thing now emerges: the mirror material measurably recoils as required by conventional theory when it emits an ordinary photon. It does not recoil as required by conventional theory when it emits an antiphoton. We therefore have shown that, in some very fundamental fashion, a photon and an antiphoton are very different, and their emission is very different from the fundamental criterion of Newton's third law. Whittaker rediscovered Tesla's standing columnar wave. Actually, the standing Whittaker 1903 wave is the same strange new wave that Nikola Tesla experimentally discovered emanating from Colorado thunderstorms 4 years earlier on the night of July 3 to 4, 1899. This was Tesla's famous standing columnar wave. Let us give credit where credit is due. In later years, the great electrician repeatedly stated that he was not using transverse electromagnetic waves, but rather he was using longitudinal electromagnetic sound waves, waves of compression and rarefaction of the etheric medium, of the virtual particle flux of vacuum, itself. In other words, he was using stress waves of the vacuum ether, pure potential waves, precisely the same as those for which Whittaker wrote the theory in 1903. In fact, then, Tesla was using Whittaker's standing potential waves with deterministic bidirectional electromagnetic transverse wave hidden substructures. He had discovered and was utilizing the internalized electromagnetic energy, i.e., the information content, of the field as well as its externalized electromagnetic energy, the field. Generations of Western physicists and electrical engineers brought up on an exclusive diet of the Heaviside-Gibbs vector truncation of Maxwell's unified electrogravitation have condescendingly believed that Tesla was mistaken. They have haughtily proclaimed that no one could produce and utilize longitudinal electromagnetic waves because they themselves could not do so. Those same physicists and engineers have not had the slightest understanding of what Tesla really discovered and used. And they have not had the slightest knowledge of the Whittaker papers, which have been there in the literature all these years, neglected in the West. Unfortunately, Whittaker's work and Tesla's work were uncovered, thoroughly investigated, extended, applied, and intensively utilized long ago by Soviet scientists to produce powerful new secret superweapons and frightful electromagnetic biological warfare weapons. Soviet weaponization. The Soviets simply took the internalized electromagnetic energy theory directly from the Whittaker papers in the open literature and weaponized it. Taking the Whittaker viewpoint, the most important and insidious thing about the woodpecker transmissions is the info-LD'd electromagnetic content inside their standing, persistent, potential waves, not the external envelope E, and B, translation fields that constitute the normal electromagnetics familiar to our own scientists and engineers. It is the info-LD'd paired bidirectional electromagnetic waves and energy, the hidden internalized electromagnetic energy that has been added within and to the normal envelope E and B field translation energy that allows the Soviets to utilize two quite different kinds of electromagnetic energy, and conceal the most important kind from prying Western investigators. What this means is that if one just measures the externalized electric and magnetic fields transmitted by the woodpecker transmitters as Western scientists and engineers do, then one misses the most important thing. Oh, one will believe the woodpecker is an over-the-horizon, OTH, radar, all right, for it obviously can perform that function by the highly restricted envelope, outfolded, externalized, electromagnetic that we Westerners already know about, measure, and use. But one will not see or know anything about what the Whittaker standing potential waves of the woodpeckers can do and are doing both energetically and biologically with their hidden internalized electromagnetic information content structures. Detection and the Aharonov-Bohm effect. To get at the info-LD'd electromagnetic structure of the Whittaker potential, one must make a two-stage detecting instrument. The instrument must contain a shielded interference first stage, where two or more Whittaker potentials interfere, a the Aharonov-Bohm effect. An overview of the Aharonov-Bohm effect is given by Olariu and Popescu. For confirmation of its proof and begrudging acceptance, see Schwarzschild. For weapons potential, see Bearden. By that initial interference in the first stage, Whittaker's second paper shows that you will outfold the hidden electromagnetic contents of the interfering potentials, even if the interference is accomplished at a great distance. Voila! Normal, externalized, electromagnetic energy magically appears at the output of the first stage interference. The first stage was shielded, of course, to prevent any other spurious ordinary electromagnetic radiation to reach the region of the output of the first stage and contaminate our subsequent measurement of the first stage output. The second stage consists of a suitable normal electromagnetic instrument, spectrum analyzer, etc. to measure the outfolded electromagnetic spectrum, power density, distribution, timing, phasing, etc., allowing one to track backwards and characterize the hidden electromagnetic information content that was info-LD'd inside the Whittaker potential. Note that, taken together, the two Whittaker papers prescribe a means for producing a macroscopic Aharonov-Bohm effect at an appreciable distance, something which is eminently weaponizable. It appears, of course, that the Soviet Union has done just that very thing. Distant heating or cooling, hot or cold explosions in the macroscopic world, interference of two Whittaker beams of widely separated woodpecker over the horizon transmitters produces electromagnetic energy at a distance, in the distant interference zone. However, this outfolded, at a distance energy can either be negative electromagnetic energy or positive electromagnetic energy. Negative, TIMC, reversed, electromagnetic energy will do negative, negentropic, work. It represents the reordering of scattered disordered electromagnetic energy in the interference zone. This of course directly corresponds to electrostatic cooling in that zone. On the other hand, positive, time-forward, electromagnetic energy will do positive, entropic, work. It represents the further disordering scattering of the electromagnetic energy in the interference zone. This in turn corresponds to electrical heating in that zone. Whether heating or cooling is produced by Whittaker-Aharonov-Bohm, WAB, interference in the distant target zone depends simply upon how the electrical grounding of the Soviet woodpecker transmitters is potentially biased vis-a-vis the local ambient vacuum potential in the interference zone. If the woodpecker ground potential is higher, positive energy, and concomitant heating, will be produced in the distant interference zone. If the woodpecker ground potential is lower, negative energy, and concomitant cooling, will be produced in the distant interference zone. The Whittaker scalar interferometer can produce the heating or cooling in the distant interference zone very slowly, gradually, or explosively. Indeed, incorporation of Whittaker's hidden M structure inside the scalar potential requires a revision of all our present energy concepts. Artificial highs and lows to steer the jet streams. One can now see that, by simply changing the biasing of the woodpecker transmitters, in a distant region the Soviets can produce atmospheric heating, and consequent lower pressure from the lowered density of the expanded air, or atmospheric cooling, and consequent higher pressure from the increased density of the contracted air. Thus the Soviets can easily make high-pressure areas or low-pressure areas in the woodpecker interference zones over the US and elsewhere, as desired. By deliberately placing and moving these artificially created high and low pressure areas, the jet streams over North America can be deviated and steered at will. This is the major means by which the Soviets engineer the weather over the United States today. Recall again that the woodpecker transmitters really were a bicentennial gift to us from the Russians, for they were cranked full up on July 4, 1976. Since that time the weather over the US has been far more anomalous than could even remotely be expected statistically. Note also that July 4, 1976 was the 77th anniversary of Nikola Tesla's discovery of his standing columnar wave, the Whittaker standing potential wave that the Soviet woodpeckers utilized to engineer America's weather. Soviet-German discovery of time-reversed radar waves. One should also realize that the Soviets discovered time-reversed, TR, electromagnetic waves right after World War II. In the latter 60s and early 70s, to their astonishment, Western scientists found time-reversed electromagnetic waves emerging in the open Soviet nonlinear optics literature. In 1972, two Soviet scientists briefed U.S. scientists at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory on nonlinear optical phase conjugate waves. At the end of World War II, the Soviets discovered four-wave mixing and pumped phase conjugate mirror effects in the German radar team's anomalous radar experiments with multi-beam illumination of radar-absorbing material, RAM. Specifically, in multi-beam illumination of RAM materials, one gets four-wave mixing and amplified phase conjugate replica effects. The phase conjugate replica, of course, is a time-reversed M wave. Further, in four-wave mixing, this time-reversed electromagnetic wave can be amplified. Thus anomalous, amplified, time-reversed radar waves would have been encountered in the radar team's experiments. The Soviets obtained the entire German radar team radar-absorbing materials, multi-beam illumination anomalies and all at the end of the war. In deciphering these anomalies, the Soviets and their German protégés discovered time-reversed electromagnetic waves, phase conjugate replicas, pumped phase conjugate mirrors, and multi-wave mixing effects. And they first discovered them in radar waves, microwaves, not in optical waves. Targeting U.S. Embassy personnel in Moscow. Accordingly, the Soviets began to apply time-reversed electromagnetic waves to radar, microwave, prototype-directed energy weapons, DEWs, by about 1950 or so. And in the early 1950s they promptly started the weak microwave radiation of the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, targeting the U.S. ambassador and guaranteeing highest-level U.S. attention. The purpose was to stimulate the U.S. with the new technology, to see what reactions and responses we produced on site at the embassy. In other words, by watching our technical reaction at the site, the embassy stimulus allowed the Soviets to find out whether or not we knew about Whittaker potentials and their info-LD electromagnetic substructures, Kazanachayev electromagnetic induction of diseases, etc. By our total lack of any scalar electromagnetic reaction, we conclusively showed the Soviets that we still only knew of ordinary externalized, envelope, electromagnetics. Specifically, we were totally unaware of the info-LD electromagnetic Whittaker potential wave whose deterministic internal structure constituted specific cellular biological information. This hidden information content of the field was utilized to generate specific diseases in U.S. Embassy personnel, including 3 U.S. ambassadors. A reinterpretation of the Johns Hopkins investigation. Some years later, Johns Hopkins scientists investigated the Soviet microwave radiation of our Moscow embassy and found that no diseases were induced in personnel in embassy locations where electro and magnetic fields from the radiation existed. The patterns of the non-zero force field radiation areas inside the embassy were carefully modeled by the Johns Hopkins team. Predictably, Johns Hopkins scientists ignored the potentials and concluded that, since no diseases occurred in personnel located where the electric and magnetic fields were, it could not have been the microwave radiation causing the effects. This conclusion, of course, follows the classical electromagnetic assumption that only the non-zero electric and magnetic fields are causative agents. Note, however, that the persistence of the potentials is inversely proportional to the strength of the electromagnetic force fields. After all, a force field is just a gradient in a potential, which means a bleed-off or escape of that potential by translation of charged particles. Potentials persist where there is no bleed-off, i.e., where there are no force fields. Whittaker potentials, which in the absence of interferometry do not produce external gradients, normally do not produce force fields and move electrons to measure. Normal instruments will therefore usually fail to detect the presence of persistent potentials for exactly the same reason they fail to detect the ambient vacuum potential in which they are immersed. The Johns Hopkins scientists reached a totally wrong conclusion. Since 1959 and the Aharonov-Bohm paper, physicists have known that the electromagnetic force fields are not even primary, the potentials are primary, and the force fields are effects created directly in the system itself by interference of the potentials. However, as yet this has not widely filtered down into conventional electrical engineering as a major consideration. Precisely stated, what the Johns Hopkins investigation actually showed was that it was not the electric and magnetic fields, the force fields, that were inducing the diseases. However, the microwave radiation was definitely involved, or else there would not have been such total anti-correlation to the force fields. That is, if the microwave radiation was not a factor, then some of the diseases should have occurred in the absence of the force fields, and some should have occurred in the presence of the force fields. Potential persistence versus gradient discharge. The curves are adapted to show typical declining exponential variation of the discharge. Note that, other things being equal, total correlation to the absence of one of a pair of canonical variables may be very high correlation to the presence of the other canonical variable. From Whittaker's 1904 paper, we know that we can discard the notion of the electric and magnetic fields in the microwave radiation pattern in the embassy, and replace these force fields with interfering, dynamic, changing, and interfering scalar electromagnetic fields. Indeed, as Whittaker showed, two source of interfering scalar potential fields beams are sufficient to produce the electromagnetic force fields. Twin beam transmitters, and therefore the presence of interference was in fact present in the microwave transmissions, as verified later. Where Whittaker's standing potential waves are not in interference, the waves remain as force field free potentials. In those regions, the E and fields are zero. The point is, the stable presence of electromagnetic force fields and the stable presence of electromagnetic scalar potentials are canonical. The hidden electromagnetic bidirectional wave structure of these stabilized potentials is still there and stabilized, even when the external force fields are zero. That is, in the presence of the Whittaker potentials where scalar interferometry does not occur, the externalized electromagnetic force field waves are zero. However, the internalized bidirectional electromagnetic wave structure of the Whittaker potentials is very much present. If the harmonics of the enfolded electromagnetic Whittaker structure have been deliberated created to possess a disease pattern signature, then that disease pattern is present in the persistent potentials. A body exposed to that activated potential will gradually charge up its master cellular communication system with the disease pattern. Thus that body will activate its defenses, try to throw off the disease, but be unable to rid its cellular control system of the cytopathogenic pattern that is affecting all its cells. That body will thus gradually develop the disease, with sufficiently prolonged exposure to the cytopathogenic pattern on the internalized electromagnetics of the persistent potentials. What Johns Hopkins researchers actually found is that the changing electromagnetic microwave potentials were not inducing the health changes in embassy personnel. Ergo, if it was the electromagnetic radiation, it had to be the persisting, unchanging, potentials, the standing potential waves a la Whittaker. And there was essentially 100% correlation between induction of the diseases and the possibility of the presence of the persistent microwave electromagnetic potentials. From there, the induction of the diseases can be explained via Kazanachiev's cytopathogenic effect, Dovyakov's information content of the field, and a deterministic info-LD internal energy structure of the Whittaker potentials. The Johns Hopkins study actually showed a high correlation between the presence of persisting microwave potentials and the locations of the induced health problems in embassy personnel. Since it showed total lack of correlation to the force fields, it eliminated any other causative agent except the structured Whittaker potentials. If the microwave radiation had not been inducing the illnesses, then some health changes should have occurred in personnel in locations where the electric and magnetic fields were present, as well as in some locations where they were absent. The Johns Hopkins team members were highly capable scientists and very good electrical engineers, but completely lacking in knowledge of structured Whittaker potentials, the Dovyakov-Whittaker info-LD electromagnetic bidirectional wave pairs that constitute a hidden deterministic information content of the field, and the Kazanachiev M induction of disease at a distance. Cytopathogenic effect. Of course, the twin beam part of the microwave radiation gives a clue to the Whittaker-Aharonov-Bohm interferometry involved, and how to get the graviton, Whittaker potential, radiation back into electromagnetic photon radiation structures inside the embassy interference zone. Advanced photobiological aspects. It should be pointed out that apparently the US did not even bother to translate Kazanachiev's important 1981 book on the electromagnetic induction of cellular death and disease. Figure 13 shows a diagrammatic illustration of the cytopathogenic effect, as demonstrated in thousands of military experiments by Kazanachiev's team. And apparently US researchers still have not translated Dovyakov's book on the information content of the field. The overwhelming importance of the most crucial photobiological work in the world simply has not been recognized to date by Western scientists and intelligence analysts. If one checks Dovyakov's work, one finds that, 1. The Russians obviously know all about the coded electromagnetic potential. They refer to the info-LD electromagnetic waves in the Whittaker potential as the information content of the field. Deviatkov also points out the incredible medical implications, and strongly stresses that this is not normal communications theory. He gives a part of the theory in his paper, all the while carefully keeping from revealing that the field being structured with information content consists of the structured scalar Whittaker potentials. He is not referring to modulations on the carriers or to wave front shaping of the electromagnetic force field waves. Of course he refers to healing and diagnosis. The effect can be used either for direct healing of diseases 114 or for the direct electromagnetic induction of desired diseases themselves. Electromagnetic healing works this way: 1. The Kazanachev cytopathogenic signals for a specific cellular disease is time-reversed, phase conjugated. This produces a specific healing signal complex. The complex signal may also be powerfully amplified by pumped four-wave mixing techniques, using a pumped phase conjugate mirror. 2. The healing signal complex is info-LD'd into a structured Whittaker standing potential wave. By Whittaker's 1904 paper, this enfolds the signal complex into one or both of the two scalar potentials that are involved in the production of a normal electromagnetic wave. This process yields, for example, a normal electromagnetic wave which has been internally altered with the hidden information content of that healing signal. Or, if one wishes, one may simply utilize a single Whittaker standing potential wave directly, and enfold the healing signal complex in it. 3. The wave with its healing information content structure is broadcast into a targeted living body, where it gradually charges up, activates, the body's master cellular control system with the desired healing signal complex. In turn, the cellular control system carries this complex to every cell of the body, gradually activating all of them with the healing signal. At the same time, the immune system is conditioned and charged, activated, for the specific healing process. Table 4 summarizes this healing methodology. The Kazanachev cytopathogenic, CPG, effect. Death and disease transmission by deterministically structured gravitons. The gravitons contain disease-specific info-LD photon patterns that represent specific disease information. The destruction of the harmonics of the Whittaker pattern destroys the time sink of the photons, freeing them and destroying the gravitons. Countering electromagnetic biological warfare. Per quantum mechanics. Mechanics is electromagnetical at base. Chemistry is electromagnetic at base. Biotoxins are electromagnetic at base. All biological warfare is electromagnetic biological warfare at base. Prepare Whittaker electromagnetic antidote as for unknown disease. Irradiate personnel with Whittaker electromagnetic antidote. Disease is reversed in system tested. The Soviets have long since developed this capability, and they continue to hold it highly secret. Techniques similar to this give the Soviet Union a perfect defense against surreptitious biological warfare. The Soviet Union is in a position to be able to successfully defend against any sort of biological warfare attack, by any kind of biological agent. It is presently the only nation on Earth that possesses such a capability, or that has the ability to employ biological warfare to the hilt without fearing retaliation in kind. Thus, for at least 3 decades biological warfare has been a preferred Soviet option, since no other country has such anti-BW defenses and the Soviet Union does. And their decades-long microwave radiation of personnel in the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, to induce mysterious health problems and diseases, has continued to show them that the U.S. knows nothing of this technology, and is unprepared to defend against it. Inducing diseases in U.S. Embassy personnel in the microwave radiation of the U.S. Embassy in Moscow and the deliberated induction of diseases and health problems in embassy personnel. Table 5 summarizes how the diseases and health problems are induced. All that is necessary is just to use and enfold the Kazanachev cytopathogenic electromagnetic signal complex, the K signal, directly into a Whittaker potential, without first time reversing it. If only the optical spectrum for the specific cytopathogenic effect is available, it can readily be translated to the microwave spectrum by using the principle of subharmonic oscillation. Such specifically activated potentials, signals, can be broadcast by transmitters as standing Whittaker potential waves, and used, with or without scalar Whittaker interferometry, to directly produce the disease pattern in targeted personnel. To produce efficient charging or activation of the targets with the disease pattern, the potentials must be persistent and stable, producing a steady trickle current of structured scalar potential pattern into the atomic nuclei of the bodies of the targets. There it gradually charges the nuclei and the master cellular control system. Electromagnetic biological warfare, MBW. Determine Kazanachev optical disease pattern. Translate to microwave frequency region. Subharmonic oscillation. Retain precise harmonic relationships. Express microwave pattern as a Whittaker-Dyatlov structure. Enfold signal complex into carriers. Include biosync mechanism or override. Transmit into targeted population. Activation kindling occurs, inducing disease. Real transmitters and equipments are imperfect. When these internally structured Whittaker waves are utilized in real transmissions, some interference of the info-LD waves usually may occur. Thus small, normal electromagnetic signal frequencies similar to electromagnetic splatter or noise, but consisting of small, outfolded complex electromagnetic frequency spectra, according to Whittaker's 1904 paper, may still be produced. U.S. investigators will detect that spectrum of normal electromagnetic waves, using their normal electromagnetic detectors. They will then puzzle over what the detected spectrum and its changes and content mean. Again, this is one more refinement of the stimulus to see if the U.S. recognizes the Kazanachev-Dyatlov content, and whether it knows how it was info-LD'd and outfolded. For this reason, the Soviets often used twin-beam microwave radiation, to provide the necessary Whittaker scalar interferometry for outfolding to guarantee our detection of electric and magnetic fields inside the embassy. This deception plan, for example, seems to have completely fooled the Johns Hopkins researchers. Thus the Soviets can intentionally induce desired disease, in human or animal bodies at a distance such as in personnel inside the U.S. embassy, in a targeted population halfway round the world, or in a targeted mammalian population such as porpoises in the ocean. 118 sea lions or seals would also provide excellent test specimens for such clandestine testing. However, note that in the target zone the diseases will be induced only where the potentials persist, that is, where there are little or no electric and magnetic fields formed to bleed off the structured or activated potential that contains the info-LD disease signal complex. Note again that this sort of thing is precisely what the Johns Hopkins study really showed, but the study scientists did not consider the potentials and their persistence as a possible inducing agent, since they had no knowledge of Whittaker structuring of potentials. Pieces of the vacuum medium. We have previously detailed some of the things that can be done with this approach and some of what has been done with it by the Soviets. Some of this documentation has been with respect to Soviet biological warfare, some has been with respect to Soviet scalar electromagnetic weapons. Phase conjugation in Soviet superweapons has been accented, and Soviet prowess in weather engineering and steering of the jet streams over North America has been documented. The reader is also strongly referred to my July 1989 update delivered to the USPA Annual Symposium, Sacramento, California. There the reader will find how to directly unify gravitation and electromagnetic in the most fundamental manner, by letting the simplest graviton, spin 2, be composed of a coupled photon-antiphoton, each of spin 1, Whittaker substructure wave pair. Potentials are composed of gravitons, not just photons. Per Dyatlov and Whittaker, gravitons can be deliberately structured internally so that they contain any desired photonic pattern structure of space-time whatsoever, including specific structures for a specific disease information content. The graviton is a flexible, dynamic piece of local vacuum medium. The exact photon coupling of the photons and antiphotons is statistical, that is, they are always coupling and uncoupling at a tremendous rate, at any point. The average coupling gives the average value of graviton spin. The graviton is the photon-coupled aspect, coupling is statistical, and so the graviton is just the statistical average of the photon-antiphoton coupling. Spin 2 gravitons constitute an uncurved local spacetime. Gravitons which on the average are substructured with less than or more than 2 photons, so that each total graviton spin is less than or greater than 2, constitute a locally curved spacetime. That condition violates Einstein's general relativity assumption, postulate, that the local spacetime is always flat. This piece of the vacuum medium, the photon-structured statistical graviton, is considered high-state secret by the Soviet Union. The quantum potential. The present author's 1989 USPA scalar electromagnetic update paper also developed a specific mechanism by means of which a quantum potential, QP, is generated, either accidentally or deliberately. Formation of a quantum potential leads to non-local effects being produced instantaneously between participating components and equipments, even though they may be widely separated. When the equipments start being connected by a common quantum potential, these widely separated equipments and/or materials start partially acting as if they were all part of the same local system, and not separated at all. The effect, self-ordering of the potentials into a quantum potential, increases as the signal density of the environment increases. Note that a local observer at one of the pieces of affected equipment will see anomalous and spurious internal electromagnetic signals apparently generated internally in, and appearing in, his electronic equipment, with no apparent cause or logical explanation. Indeed, since we do not design and build electronic equipment to operate in a quantum potential connected manner, the extra signals cause serious interference in the electronics functioning, often even damaging or destroying the circuits themselves. Every signal produced in any one of the quantum potential participating equipments is at least partially and instantly input to all the rest of the participants as well. Thus each local observer sees anomalous and spurious internal jamming signals that interfere with the electronics functioning, and that may even disable or destroy it again. He sees no logical explanation for these mysterious internal jamming signals, which seem to spontaneously arise out of nowhere. When subjected to the QP effect, electronic equipments throughout an area exhibit massive and shocking aberrations, bizarre malfunctioning, and spurious failures. Every circuit, equipment, generator, warm source infrared, etc. in the area contributes to the effect. It is purely a function of the signal density, and has only very little to do with the power of the individual signals. A startling example of the formation of a quantum potential, and an unexpected severe effect from these non-local effects, was experienced in the April 1986 U.S. air attack on Libya. The quantum potential formed as a result of the increased signal density, and the concomitant increased occurrence of multi-wave mixing phenomena, of the electromagnetic environment. Figure 14 and Table 6 illustrate these anomalies experienced in the attack. Table 7 summarizes recent Pentagon studies of electromagnetic interference, EMI. It appears that, unless EMI shielding is universally incorporated in U.S. equipments, U.S. military forces may encounter catastrophic electronic equipment failures in the really dense signal environment expected in the European theater. Even with electromagnetic interference shielding, however, there is another effect, presently unknown to U.S. analysts, that may well predominate, that is, the formation of a quantum potential can still occur. If a quantum potential forms, the subsequent wholesale failure of electronic equipments on the battlefield due to non-local self-ordering of the atomic nuclei in the radiating circuits and equipments may prove catastrophic. Further, both enemy and friendly radiations and circuit signals will contribute to increasing the effect. Figure 15 shows the mechanism for generating a quantum potential. The Soviets, for example, are fully aware of this quantum potential effect, including how to deliberately generate a quantum potential in a given area. They also can be expected to know how to shield their own electronic equipments against these non-local quantum potential effects, So they can operate in a quantum potential environment, at least in one that is not too strong, but which would still be strong enough to disable and destroy electronic equipments not shielded against quantum potential self-ordering of the nuclei. The West does not yet even know of the quantum potential effect, much less how to shield against it. The US shields against ordinary electromagnetic interference, but knows nothing of the quantum potential and does not shield against it. Electromagnetic interference shielding will increase the signal density required for quantum potential formation by about 2 or 3 orders of magnitude, but will not eliminate the effect. It will just move the QP effect to a higher threshold of formation. U.S. attack on Libya, April 1986. The quantum potential EMI fireflies effect. Real-time anomalous electromagnetic interference via quantum potential. U.S. airstrike on Libya in April 1986. 33 U.S. aircraft in strike. Many high-powered transmitters. Communications. Jammers. Radars. Severe, unexpected electromagnetic interference encountered. 1 F-111 downed. Numerous weapons went astray. 3 foreign embassies damaged. 7 aircraft aborted. Strike completed, but with difficulty. Recent Pentagon electromagnetic interference studies. U.S. transmission combinations can affect aircraft flight control. Turn off fuel supply. Cause uncommanded dive turn. Bring down U.S. warplanes. Severe electromagnetic interference effects on strike on Libya. UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter problems. Uncommanded turns. 5 electromagnetic interference crashes since 1982. $175 million program launched to shield it. 7-month preliminary Air Force study of Libya electromagnetic interference. Severe electromagnetic interference problems exist. Electromagnetic shielding in high-tech weapons often waived. Thousands of conflicts possible. Major 3-year $35 million 66-man study performed. Self-targeting, all components activated. Mechanism for forming a quantum potential. Self-targeting exchange in info-LD-Whittaker channels between nuclei leads to nuclei pumped for wave mixing, amplification, and consequent growth of time-synced potentia, the quantum potential, in widely separated nuclei and signal-interacted equipments. Variations of the woodpecker transmitters, for example, and of ultra-wideband transmitters could be adapted for the purpose of creating such an electromagnetic signal density in the environment that a quantum potential would begin to form. Thus, on a future battlefield, we may still get the shock of our lives when a great deal of our high-tech equipment, which is very good equipment, suddenly begins to malfunction and fail. Systems such as surface-to-air missile systems, radar systems including AWACS, power generators, tank fire control systems, aircraft avionics and fire control systems, missile guidance and control systems, and communication systems may fail us at the most intense part of the battle, when the need is the greatest, if a quantum potential forms on the battlefield. What I did not mention in my 1989 Sacramento paper is that the quantum potential can also be internally structured with a deterministic, enfolded electromagnetic content. The quantum potential is also constructed of photon-structured gravitons, just as is the normal potential. The quantum potential therefore has a Whittaker bidirectional transverse wave substructure. Note particularly Ignatiewicz's mention of just such a structure in the potential for the Schrödinger equation, see reference 16 above. Transmission of the graviton envelope is essentially a phase wave transmission and is instantaneous. We accent that, when quantum potential weapons are utilized and a deliberate Whittaker structure is introduced in it, very powerful effects can be generated that cannot be resisted or opposed by ordinary means. A quantum potential, for example, can conceivably be tailored so that it nullifies or destroys only a single, particular type of weapon or system, or mix of them. It can be used to generate any desired effect in equipment or personnel at a distance. In this manner, the biological cytopathogenic effects cellular death and disease can also be produced at a distance and throughout a very wide area, without any apparent direct electromagnetic transmission of them in the ordinary sense. Of course, a healing signal can also be implanted in a quantum potential, as an antidote. It is conceivable that, using the woodpecker transmitters, the Soviets may be able to induce in a targeted population the eerie situation where, the more persons that become infected with a particular disease, the more infectious the disease becomes by non-contact means, directly through a specifically structured bioquantum potential linking that population. Further discussion of this quantum mechanical action at a distance and biological warfare effect is beyond the scope of this paper. The reader is referred to cogent references on the quantum potential, on the Aharonov-Bohm effect, 130, and on the inconsistencies between quantum mechanics and general relativity. The reader may combine the information in those quantum potential references with the information in this paper and draw his or her own conclusions. Detection of scalar electromagnetic in woodpecker signals. In August 1989, a close colleague inventor friend positively detected scalar electromagnetic radiation directly connected with several giant radial clouds in the sky just off the California coast. Each of these clouds was stabilized against winds and did not move. Other normal clouds in the sky moved right along in the winds blowing inland from the ocean. Further, on several occasions the scalar electromagnetic radiation was observed by my colleague to suddenly be cut off, and in each case tie-associated radial cloud dissipated within seconds. Such giant patterned clouds, with radial cloud streamers radiating from the center, have been widely observed across North America, connected with Soviet weather engineering. Speculation on this scalar beam weather engineering has been published in a national medium. Several types of radial clouds, the single radial, the connected twin, and multiple separate singles and twins have been observed.